Please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Tax was one, succession is the other, but joining the tax and succession is a subject which is not coined in, but we cannot leave it high and dry and be without it. And that is understanding, because succession is what happens post death. But inter vivos, during your lifetime, you can achieve similar goals through strategic planning of the 4-letter word, what we call as gift. And who does not love gifts? But then gifts are taxed. And you need to understand what are the tax implications for gifts in your home country as an NRI, and also here in India, where you are receiving or giving gifts. So let me come very quickly to tax on gifts received by NRIs in India. Now, if you are receiving gifts in India, obviously they are governed by the Indian tax regulations. So you have to keep in mind the provisions of what we call as Section 56 of the Income Tax Act, which is uniformly applicable to both residents and non-residents. And what does that section say? That anything beyond 50,000 rupees in the aggregate which you receive from one or more persons during a financial year is to be treated as your income. But then there are important exceptions, and here is where all the planning is done. Merging it with what we call as the liberalized remittance scheme, LRS. I'm not going into territories where Kotak has already acquainted you with. I'm sure you must have done n number of seminars on the LRS. $250,000 any person resident can send overseas, not only for his own investments, but as gifts to anybody. Until this amendment came on 5th of July 2019, about which I am going to talk. But keep in mind that if as an NRI you are receiving a gift from any person who is a close relative within the meaning and scope of the term relative as defined under the provision of the Income Tax Act, which virtually includes not just blood relatives but goes beyond also. So you have to be well conversant with that. And along with that, you still have one more occasion when you can amass tax-free gifts. And what is that? Shantanu is looking at me. That is wedding gifts. It's a smile on his face. I don't know whether you enjoyed that. But in the lighter vein, Manish bhai, people often ask me, Mukesh bhai, is there any restriction on the number of times we can get into the wedlock? And let me tell you, still the taxman has not been smart enough to plug this loophole. And theoretically, you could have cases. Shantanu, if you are very anxious to amass some wealth, you could get a divorce and remarry again. Not necessary that you need another character. You can say, I patched up with my divorced wife and this is another remarriage. Of course, that was in the lighter vein. But these are two occasions, either gift from a relative or a wedding. And obviously, what we are going to talk later is inheritance, succession or will. When you get any amount of kitty, under that, there is no tax at all. Otherwise, gifts are treated as taxable income in India. So keep this in mind. Friends, those NRIs who are sending gifts to their relatives in India need not worry, because whatever gifts they send to their relatives will be completely tax-free in their hands. What happens when it is vice versa? Vice versa, until 5th of July 2019, in fact, there were loopholes and grey areas open to the extent that this provision was being misused. Because this 50,000 plus being treated as income, and for tax purposes you have to pay tax on that, that provision was there in respect of gifts made in India, received in India. But what people used to do is, from India, they would send gifts to anywhere in the world, not necessarily relatives, to strange people for whatever considerations, and the Indian government was deprived. Obviously, in those territories, those who received gifts, in fact, wherever, by and large, in fact, for NRIs, practically in all home countries, the receipt of gift is always tax-free because it's treated as a capital amount. In India, it's and there where you have gift tax, it is the person who is giving the gift. Above those prescribed limits, etc., they have to pay tax, or it is cut from their estate inheritance tax, kitties and all that. So very interestingly, because of these two sides of the coin being there, that in India, the donor doesn't pay any tax, it's only the donee, the recipient. And in other countries outside, the recipient, it is always treated as tax-free capital. It is donor there who pays the tax. So considering this aspect, to plug this loophole, friends, effective 5th July 2019, the amendment was made while full protection was granted to gifts made to blood relatives or special occasions like wedding, which are exempt under 56(2). It was provided that if you are making a gift to a non-resident who is not a relative, what happens? You will need to deduct tax at source, and I'm sure Kotak is doing that. They have to ensure that this is done before the money goes out. Your 15 CACB has to take care of that, because under section 195, withholding tax at 30% is required to be made. So considering this, friends, you have to work out. And here I am just leaving a thought, just by putting this one sentence which is loaded with tax planning ideas, and that is, you have to evaluate the tax impact of what I call as receiving gifts versus gains. If you are sending, if you are giving an asset to an NRI as a gift, if that has to be sold by him and he has to pay tax on that amount of capital gains, what is the tax? Or in the alternative, if the Indian resident is selling that asset, paying tax thereon, which if it is less, it would be a smart idea to do so, and then remit that as a tax-free capital to the relative outside. So gifts versus gains, evaluating the tax impact in the context of the DTAA also as a huge aspect which you have to consider. In fact, whenever now, as I said, you are doing any planning for NRIs, you have to look at both sides of the coin. If you are just enamored, there are so many tax concessions in India, you will land up in trouble as far as your home country is concerned. Or it could be vice versa.